In the quiet city of Omaha, Nebraska, in the spring of 2018, Amelia and her husband Daniel awaited the arrival of their first child with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. Amelia, a dedicated school teacher at a local elementary school, had always dreamed of motherhood. She spent her days in the classroom, guiding young minds through lessons in reading and math, but her thoughts often drifted to the future, imagining the moment she would hold her baby in her arms. Her classroom, adorned with colourful posters and student artwork, reflected her warmth and creativity, qualities she hoped to pass on to her child. After school, she would return to their modest two-storey home on the outskirts of the city, where the scent of freshly cut grass from the neighbouring lawns mingled with the aroma of her cooking. The couple had purchased the house 2 years prior, drawn to its wraparound porch and the promise of a peaceful life. Amelia often pictured their child playing in the small backyard, perhaps chasing fireflies on warm summer evenings. Daniel, an engineer at a local construction firm, shared Amelia's enthusiasm for their growing family. His days were filled with blueprints and site visits, but he found joy in returning home to plan for the baby's arrival. He had taken to assembling a crib in the spare bedroom, a task he approached with the same precision he applied to his engineering projects. The room, painted a soft yellow at Amelia's insistence, began to take shape as a nursery. Shelves held stuffed animals and children's books, carefully selected during weekend trips to local bookstores. Amelia and Daniel spent hours debating names, settling on a shortlist that included Emma for a girl and Nathan for a boy. They imagined their child inheriting Amelia's curiosity and Daniel's quiet determination, envisioning family vacations to the Grand Canyon or the beaches of California, dreams that felt within reach in the glow of their shared optimism. Their evenings were often spent in the living room, where Amelia would sit cross-legged on the couch, her hands resting on her growing belly, while Daniel read parenting books aloud. The couple attended prenatal classes at a community centre, learning about breathing techniques and newborn care, laughing together at their clumsy attempts to swaddle a doll. Amelia's energy seemed boundless, though there were moments when Daniel noticed a fleeting shadow cross her face, a brief pause in her laughter that she quickly dismissed. He attributed it to the physical demands of pregnancy, unaware of the quiet unease that sometimes stirred within her. Amelia, for her part, pushed these feelings aside, focusing on the joy of the moment. She spent afternoons browsing baby clothes at a nearby mall, picking out tiny onesies with playful patterns, each purchase a tangible step toward the future they were building. The couple's home became a hub of preparation. Friends and neighbours dropped by with gifts, hand-knitted blankets, a stroller, a mobile that played soft lullabies. Amelia's colleagues at school threw a small baby shower in the staff room, complete with cupcakes and a banner that read, "Welcome, little one." She beamed as she opened packages, her gratitude evident in her warm smiles, though she occasionally found herself staring out the window, lost in thought. Daniel, ever attentive, planned a special evening to celebrate their last weeks as a couple before becoming a family. He cooked Amelia's favourite meal, a spaghetti with homemade marinara sauce, and they ate by candlelight, reminiscing about their early days together. The simplicity of these moments grounded them, reinforcing their belief that they were ready for the challenges and joys of parenthood. Amelia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, with regular checkups confirming the baby's health. She visited her doctor at a clinic near their home, where the hum of medical equipment and the kind reassurances of the staff put her at ease. The ultrasound images, grainy but precious, hung on their refrigerator, a constant reminder of the life they were bringing into the world. Amelia kept a journal, jotting down her hopes for the baby and her reflections on the changes in her body and heart. She wrote about her dreams of reading bedtime stories, of teaching her child to ride a bike, of watching them grow into someone kind and brave. Yet in the quiet of the night, when Daniel slept beside her, Amelia sometimes lay awake, her mind wandering to a moment from months past, a fleeting encounter she tried to bury deep within her. She would close her eyes, willing herself to focus on the present, on the nursery, on Daniel's steady breathing, on the life they were creating together. The future seemed bright, and Amelia clung to that light, determined to let nothing dim it. In the early hours of a warm spring morning in 2018, Amelia arrived at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha, her contractions growing stronger as the moment of childbirth drew near. The hospital, a sprawling complex of glass and brick, buzzed with quiet efficiency, its corridors filled with the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional footsteps of nurses. Amelia, gripping Daniel's hand, felt a mix of anticipation and fear as she was wheeled into the labour and delivery ward. The room was sterile but comforting, with pale blue walls and a large window that let in the soft light of dawn. Nurses moved with practised calm, checking monitors and preparing instruments, while Daniel stayed close, his presence a steady anchor amidst the uncertainty. Amelia's labour progressed rapidly, but the intensity of the contractions soon took a toll, her breaths coming in short, laboured gasps as she tried to focus on the techniques they had practised in prenatal classes. The medical team, led by an experienced obstetrician, monitored Amelia closely, noting the increasing complexity of her labour. The ultrasound performed weeks earlier had shown only one child, a fact that had shaped all their preparations. But as the delivery unfolded, the doctor's expression grew tense. After hours of effort, Amelia gave birth to not one but two babies, a revelation that stunned the room. The first, a girl, emerged fragile and silent, her tiny chest barely moving. The second, a boy, followed moments later, his cries piercing the air. The medical staff worked swiftly, transferring the newborns to a team of neonatologists who had been summoned when complications arose. Daniel, standing at the edge of the room, watched in a daze as the doctors huddled around the infants, their movements precise but urgent. The news came like a blow. The girl, too weak to sustain herself, had succumbed to respiratory distress shortly after birth, her life extinguished before it could truly begin. The boy, though stronger, required immediate care in the neonatal intensive care unit, his condition precarious but stable. As the reality of the loss settled over Daniel, another crisis unfolded. During the delivery, Amelia had been given an epidural to manage her pain, a routine procedure that had seemed unremarkable at the time. But within minutes of the medication's administration, her vitals began to falter. Her breathing grew shallow, her skin paled, and her eyes fluttered closed. The medical team sprang into action, their voices sharp with urgency as they called for additional support. Monitors beeped frantically, and a crash cart was wheeled into the room. The obstetrician, consulting with an anesthesiologist, quickly identified the cause, a rare allergic reaction to the anaesthetic, a complication so uncommon it had not been anticipated. Amelia's body, overwhelmed by the reaction, slipped into a coma, her consciousness fading as the doctors worked to stabilise her. They moved her to the intensive care unit, where she lay surrounded by tubes and monitors, her face serene but unresponsive. Daniel, caught in a whirlwind of grief and shock, struggled to process the events. The joy of welcoming their children had been shattered by the loss of their daughter and the dire condition of their son. The hospital staff, trained to deliver difficult news with compassion, guided him to a small waiting area where he sat, staring blankly at the linoleum floor. A nurse brought him a cup of coffee, its warmth doing little to ease the chill that had settled in his chest. He was allowed a brief visit to the neonatal intensive care unit, where he saw his son for the first time. The boy, tiny and fragile, lay in an incubator, connected to a web of tubes and wires. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of a ventilator, a small fighter in a world that had already tested his resilience. Daniel's heart ached as he placed a trembling hand against the glass, unable to touch the child but feeling an instinctive need to protect him. The days that followed blurred into a haze of hospital visits and sleepless nights. Daniel divided his time between two worlds, the neonatal unit, where he watched his son's slow progress, and the intensive care unit, where Amelia lay motionless, her condition unchanged. The doctors provided updates with cautious optimism, explaining that the boy's vital signs were improving, though he would need weeks of care. Amelia's prognosis, however, remained uncertain, her coma a result of the body's unpredictable response to the medication. Daniel clung to routine to keep himself grounded, arriving at the hospital each morning with a thermos of coffee and a notebook where he jotted down questions for the doctors. He sat by Amelia's bedside, her hand limp in his, and whispered promises he wasn't sure she could hear. The weight of the loss and the uncertainty pressed heavily on him, but he refused to let despair take hold, driven by a quiet determination to be there for both his wife and their surviving child. The sterile hum of the University of Nebraska Medical Center continued to envelop Daniel as he moved between the neonatal intensive care unit and Amelia's bedside in the spring of 2018. The hospital had become his second home, its fluorescent lights and antiseptic scent now as familiar as his own living room. The surviving boy, still unnamed and fighting for strength in his incubator, required constant monitoring. As part of routine protocol, the medical team conducted a series of blood tests to track his health, ensuring his fragile systems were stabilizing. Daniel, exhausted from sleepless nights and the emotional weight of losing his daughter and watching Amelia remain unresponsive, barely registered the significance of these tests at first. He sat in the neonatal unit, his eyes fixed on the tiny form of his son, whose chest rose and fell with the aid of machines, unaware that a revelation was about to upend his already fragile world. A young doctor, her face kind but professional, approached Daniel one morning as he lingered near the incubator. She carried a clipboard, her fingers tightening around it as she delivered the results of the blood tests. The boy's blood type, she explained, did not match either Amelia's or Daniel's. The words landed heavily, each syllable sinking into Daniel's consciousness like a stone into still water. He stared at the doctor, his mind struggling to process the information. The hospital's protocol required verification, and the test had been repeated twice to rule out any error, but the results remained consistent. The boy's blood type pointed to a biological impossibility. Neither Daniel nor Amelia could be his biological parents in the way they had assumed. The doctor's tone was measured, her words carefully chosen to avoid judgment, but the implication hung in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. Daniel felt a wave of nausea, his hands gripping the edge of a nearby chair as he tried to steady himself. At first, Daniel rejected the possibility of betrayal. He had known Amelia for years, their love built on shared dreams and quiet moments of trust. The idea that she could have been unfaithful seemed unthinkable, a violation of everything he believed about their marriage. Yet as he sat in the hospital's quiet chapel later that day, the sterile glow of the stained glass windows casting faint colours across his hands, doubts began to creep in. His mind wandered to a memory from the previous autumn when Amelia had attended a teachers' conference in Kansas City. She had returned home a day later than expected, her explanations centered on extra workshops and networking events. At the time, Daniel had thought nothing of it, charmed by her stories of new teaching strategies and her enthusiasm for her work. Now those memories took on a different hue, each detail scrutinized for signs he might have missed. Had her smile been forced? Had her laughter carried a trace of guilt? The questions gnawed at him, each one a small betrayal of the certainty he had once held. Daniel's days became a blur of routine and torment. He continued his vigil between the neonatal unit and Amelia's bedside, but his thoughts were consumed by the blood test results. He watched the boy, whose tiny fingers curled reflexively around a tube, and felt a confusing mix of love and detachment. The child was innocent, a fragile life fighting to survive, yet the knowledge of his origins cast a shadow over Daniel's connection to him. He studied Amelia's face as she lay in her hospital bed, her features peaceful but distant, and wondered what secrets she carried. The monitors beeped steadily, their rhythm a cruel reminder of her absence from the questions that now plagued him. He wanted to ask her to understand, but her coma kept her locked away, leaving him to wrestle with his thoughts alone. The medical staff, aware of the delicate situation, approached Daniel with care. A genetic counsellor was brought in to discuss the implications of the blood type mismatch. She explained in a calm and clinical tone that such discrepancies often pointed to a different biological father, though she emphasised that only further testing could confirm it. Daniel listened, his face impassive, but inside his emotions churned. He felt a growing sense of betrayal, not just toward Amelia, but toward the future they had planned together. The nursery at home, with its carefully chosen yellow paint and stuffed animals, now seemed like a monument to a life that might never exist. Yet, even as anger and hurt simmered within him, Daniel couldn't fully detach from the boy in the incubator. Each visit to the neonatal unit strengthened his resolve to see the child through his recovery, even as he grappled with the uncertainty of his role in the boy's life. Determined to find answers, Daniel began to piece together a plan. He considered reaching out to Amelia's colleagues or friends, anyone who might know more about her time at the conference. The thought of investigating his wife's past felt like a violation, but the need for clarity outweighed his discomfort. He spent evenings in the hospital cafeteria, his notebook filled with dates and details, as he tried to reconstruct the timeline of Amelia's trip. The memory of her delayed return, her vague explanations, and her distracted demeanor in the weeks that followed haunted him. Yet, even as he prepared to dig deeper, his heart pulled him back to the hospital, to the boy who needed care, and to Amelia, whose life hung in a delicate balance. Daniel's love for her, though tested, remained a tether, keeping him from spiraling into despair as he faced the possibility that their family was built on a truth he had yet to fully uncover. Daniel's resolve to uncover the truth hardened as the days unfolded in the sterile corridors of the University of Nebraska Medical Center in the spring of 2018. The hospital, with its endless hum of monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses' footsteps, had become a labyrinth of grief and uncertainty for him. The revelation of the boy's blood-type mismatch had fractured his trust, and though his love for Amelia anchored him, the need to understand the origins of their surviving child drove him forward. He spent sleepless nights in the hospital's waiting area, his notebook now filled with scribbled timelines and questions, each page a testament to his growing obsession with piecing together the puzzle of Amelia's past. The weight of betrayal pressed against his chest, but he refused to let it consume him, determined to confront the truth head-on, no matter how painful it might be. His first step was to reach out to Camille, Amelia's older sister, who lived in a small apartment on the other side of Omaha. Daniel drove through the city's quiet streets, the spring air heavy with the scent of blooming lilacs, to meet her at a coffee shop near her home. Camille, a librarian with a reserved demeanor, had always been close to Amelia, sharing a bond forged through years of sisterhood. Daniel had hesitated to involve her, knowing the conversation would be fraught, but she was the only person he trusted to know Amelia's secrets. Over a cup of coffee that grew cold as they sat, Daniel explained the blood test results, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the turmoil within. Camille's face paled, her fingers tightening around her mug as she listened. After a long pause, she admitted with visible reluctance that Amelia had confided in her about a brief lapse during a teachers' conference in Kansas City the previous autumn. The confession felt like a fresh wound, but Daniel pressed for details, needing to understand the scope of what had happened. Camille recounted the events as Amelia had described them. The conference, a 3-day event focused on innovative teaching methods, had ended with a celebratory gathering at a downtown bar. Amelia, caught up in the lively atmosphere and perhaps feeling the weight of her routine life, had stayed late with a group of colleagues. There, she met Ethan, a charismatic guitarist performing with a local band. His easy charm and soulful music had drawn her in, and what began as a conversation over drinks led to a fleeting, impulsive encounter later that night. Camille emphasized that Amelia had been consumed by guilt afterward, insisting the moment was a mistake she intended to leave behind. When Amelia learned of her pregnancy shortly after, she chose to focus on her life with Daniel, burying the memory of Ethan as if it had never happened. Camille's words, though delivered with care, cut deeply, confirming Daniel's worst fears and leaving him grappling with the reality of Amelia's infidelity. Determined to face the man who might be the boy's father, Daniel tracked Ethan down. Using information from Camille, he learned that Ethan lived in Lincoln, a short drive from Omaha, where he played gigs at local venues and worked odd jobs to support his music. Daniel found Ethan's contact information through a mutual acquaintance from the conference, a fellow teacher who had attended the same event. The drive to Lincoln felt endless, the flat Nebraska landscape stretching out under a grey sky, mirroring Daniel's somber mood. He met Ethan at a small diner, its neon sign flickering in the early evening light. Ethan, lean and unshaven, with a worn guitar case at his side, seemed surprised but not defensive when Daniel explained the situation. He listened quietly as Daniel described the boy's condition and the blood test results, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. Ethan admitted to the night with Amelia, describing it as a spontaneous connection that ended as quickly as it began. He had not seen or heard from her since, unaware of her pregnancy until that moment. To resolve the question of paternity, Ethan agreed to a DNA test. The process was swift, arranged through the hospital's genetic counsellor, who coordinated the collection of samples with clinical precision. Daniel waited anxiously for the results, spending his days in a haze of hospital visits and restless nights at home. The nursery, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a hollow reminder of the life he had envisioned. When the results arrived, delivered in a sealed envelope by a nurse, they confirmed what Daniel had both dreaded and expected. The boy was Ethan's biological son. The confirmation hit like a physical blow, shattering the fragile hope that the blood-type mismatch had been a mistake. Daniel sat alone in the hospital parking lot, the envelope crumpled in his hand, staring at the horizon as he tried to make sense of his unravelling world. His love for Amelia, still lying unconscious in the intensive care unit, and his growing attachment to the boy, fighting for life in the neonatal ward, clashed with the sting of betrayal, leaving him torn between anger and duty. Despite the pain, Daniel's thoughts returned to the child and Amelia. The boy, still fragile but showing signs of improvement, had begun to occupy a space in Daniel's heart, his tiny movements and steady progress a small light in the darkness. Amelia, though unresponsive, remained the centre of his world, her presence a reminder of the life they had built together. The truth about Ethan had answered one question but raised countless others, and Daniel knew he could not move forward without confronting the full scope of what had happened. He resolved to keep searching for clarity, not just for himself, but for the family he still hoped to salvage, even as the foundations of that hope crumbled beneath him. The weight of the DNA test results settled over Daniel like a dense fog, clouding his thoughts as he navigated the sterile halls of the University of Nebraska Medical Center in the spring of 2018. The confirmation that the boy in the neonatal intensive care unit was not his biological son had left him reeling, his heart torn between love for Amelia and the sting of her betrayal. The hospital, once a place of hope, now felt like a crucible, testing his capacity to reconcile the life he had envisioned with the reality he now faced. Daniel's days were marked by a relentless routine, mornings spent by Amelia's bedside in the intensive care unit, her face still serene despite the tubes and monitors, and afternoons in the neonatal ward, watching the boy's fragile form grow stronger. Each visit deepened his internal struggle, as he grappled with what it meant to be a father, a husband, and a man whose trust had been shattered. Daniel's love for Amelia remained a constant, an anchor that kept him from drifting into despair. He sat by her bed each morning, his fingers tracing the outline of her hand, willing her to wake and offer answers he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. The doctors provided cautious updates, noting subtle improvements in her condition, slight responses to stimuli, a faint increase in brain activity that suggested she might soon emerge from her coma. The possibility of her recovery filled Daniel with both hope and dread, as he wondered how he would confront her with the truth about the boy and her infidelity. His nights were sleepless, spent in their quiet Omaha home, where the nursery stood as a painful reminder of the family they had planned. The yellow walls and neatly folded onesies seemed to mock his uncertainty, yet he couldn't bring himself to dismantle the room, clinging to the possibility that it might still hold a future for them. The boy, still unnamed and fighting for strength in his incubator, became a focal point of Daniel's conflicted emotions. Each visit to the neonatal unit revealed small signs of progress. The boy's breathing grew steadier, his weight increased, and his tiny fingers began to grasp at the air. Daniel stood by the incubator, his breath fogging the glass, and felt a stirring of affection that surprised him. The child was innocent, a life untouched by the complexities of adult mistakes, and Daniel found himself drawn to the boy's resilience. Yet the knowledge that Ethan was the biological father cast a shadow over these moments, forcing Daniel to confront the question of whether he could love a child who was not his own. He studied the boy's features, searching for traces of Amelia or even Ethan, but found only the universal vulnerability of a newborn, a blank slate that stirred both protectiveness and doubt within him. Ethan's unexpected involvement added another layer to Daniel's turmoil. After the DNA test confirmed his paternity, Ethan began to show tentative interest in the boy. He contacted Daniel through the hospital, asking to visit the neonatal unit and see the child for himself. Daniel agreed, meeting Ethan in the hospital's cafeteria, a neutral space where the clatter of trays and the murmur of voices provided a buffer against the tension. Ethan arrived, his guitar case slung over his shoulder, his demeanour a mix of curiosity and unease. He spoke of his life in Lincoln, a patchwork of late-night gigs and temporary jobs, and admitted he had never imagined himself as a father. His interest in the boy seemed genuine but fleeting, lacking the depth of commitment Daniel knew a child required. Ethan's transient lifestyle, marked by late nights and constant movement, stood in stark contrast to the stability Daniel and Amelia had built, reinforcing Daniel's belief that Ethan was ill-suited to take on the role of a parent. Daniel's reflections often took him to the hospital's rooftop garden, a quiet space where rows of potted plants and benches offered a respite from the clinical chaos below. He sat there in the evenings, the Omaha skyline stretching out before him, and wrestled with the concept of family. He thought of his own childhood, raised by parents who had faced their own struggles but remained bound by love and choice. The idea that family was not solely defined by blood began to take root, challenging the anger that had initially consumed him. He recalled moments with Amelia, her laughter during their first date, the way she hummed while cooking, the dreams they had shared for their child, and realised that his love for her, though tested, had not diminished. The boy, too, had begun to carve a place in his heart, his survival a testament to the same stubborn hope that kept Daniel at Amelia's side. The decision Daniel faced was monumental, one that would shape the rest of his life. He considered walking away, leaving Amelia and the boy to Ethan, but the thought of abandoning them felt like a betrayal of his own heart. He visited the neonatal unit one evening, watching as a nurse gently adjusted the boy's blanket, and felt a shift within himself. The child, with his delicate features and quiet strength, was no longer just a symbol of Amelia's mistake, but a life that needed love and care. Daniel began to imagine a future where he could raise the boy, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a son, bound to him by choice rather than biology. The hospital's hum faded into the background as he stood by the incubator, his resolve hardening. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but the love he felt for Amelia and the growing bond with the boy gave him the strength to face the uncertainty, determined to make a decision that would honour the family he still believed in. Amelia's emergence from her coma in the spring of 2018 was a slow, arduous process, marked by fleeting moments of consciousness that flickered like a weak flame in the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Her eyes, once vibrant with laughter, opened intermittently, clouded with confusion, as her body fought to reclaim itself from the grip of the allergic reaction that had silenced her. The intensive care unit, with its relentless beeping monitors and sterile air, became a place of tentative hope for Daniel, who had spent weeks oscillating between despair and determination. He sat by her bedside each day, his hand resting gently on hers, watching for any sign of recognition. The doctors, cautiously optimistic, explained that her recovery would be gradual, requiring physical therapy and time to restore her strength. Daniel clung to their words, his heart buoyed by the possibility that the woman he loved might return to him, even as he braced himself for the conversation that would lay bare the truths he had uncovered. When Amelia's condition stabilized enough for her to remain awake for longer periods, Daniel made the painful decision to share the full weight of what had transpired. He sat beside her hospital bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light filtering through the window, and recounted the events that had shattered their world, the birth of their twins, the death of their daughter, the survival of their son, and the DNA test that revealed the boy was not his. His voice remained steady, though his hands trembled as he spoke of Ethan and the brief affair that had altered their future. Amelia listened, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filling with tears as the reality of her actions settled over her. Weakened by her ordeal, she managed only a faint nod, her body too frail to express the depth of her remorse. She admitted to her encounter with Ethan, describing it as a fleeting moment of weakness during a time when she felt adrift, overwhelmed by the monotony of her routine and the pressures of her life. Her confession, raw and unfiltered, was laced with guilt, and she reached for Daniel's hand, her grip feeble but desperate, as if seeking forgiveness through touch alone. Daniel absorbed her words in silence, his heart a battleground of love and pain. He had anticipated this moment, rehearsing it in his mind during countless sleepless nights, yet hearing Amelia's admission brought no relief, only a deeper ache. He saw the sincerity in her eyes, the weight of her regret, and it stirred memories of their shared life, their quiet evenings cooking together, their dreams of a family, the way she smiled when she spoke of their future child. Those memories clashed with the betrayal, but they also reminded him of the bond that had sustained them. He left the hospital that evening, driving aimlessly through Omaha's streets, the city's lights blurring as he wrestled with the choice before him. The nursery at home, with its untouched crib and folded blankets, loomed in his mind, a symbol of both loss and possibility. He knew that whatever decision he made would redefine their family, and he carried the weight of that responsibility with a quiet resolve. Ethan's presence added another layer of complexity to Daniel's deliberations. Having learned of Amelia's awakening, Ethan arrived at the hospital one overcast afternoon, his guitar case absent, but his demeanour still carrying the restless energy of a man unmoored. He met Daniel in the hospital's rooftop garden, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. Ethan's visit to the neonatal unit had left him visibly moved. He had seen the boy, now named Nathan by the nurses for ease of reference, and felt a stirring of connection. Yet, as he spoke with Daniel, his words revealed the truth of his life. A string of temporary homes, late-night performances, and a lack of stability that made fatherhood an impractical dream. He acknowledged the bond forming between Daniel, Amelia, and Nathan, and in a moment of clarity, chose to step back, recognizing that he could not offer the boy the life Daniel and Amelia could provide. His decision, though selfless, left Daniel with a mix of relief and unease, as it placed the full weight of the future on his shoulders. Daniel's visits to Nathan in the neonatal unit grew more frequent, each one deepening the bond he had begun to feel. The boy, now stronger, no longer relied on a ventilator, his tiny chest rising and falling with his own breaths. Daniel watched as nurses adjusted Nathan's blankets, noting the boy's growing alertness, his eyes beginning to track movement. The sight stirred something profound in Daniel, a sense of responsibility that transcended biology. He began to see Nathan not as a reminder of Amelia's mistake, but as a child who needed him, a life he could shape with love and care. Late at night, in the quiet of their home, Daniel sat in the nursery, holding one of Nathan's tiny onesies, and made his choice. Family, he realized, was not defined by blood alone, but by the commitments made in the face of hardship. He would raise Nathan as his son, embracing the boy as part of the life he and Amelia had dreamed of, despite the pain that had tested it. A year later, in the spring of 2019, Daniel, Amelia, and Nathan walked together through a park in Omaha, the air warm with the promise of summer. Amelia's recovery had been slow, her steps still tentative, but her determination to rebuild impeded system heel shone through. Daniel, carrying Nathan in a sling, navigated the stroller through the park's winding paths, while Amelia leaned on his arm for support. Her strength was returning, but she still relied on a cane, her body bearing the scars of her ordeal. Nathan, now a healthy toddler, babbled softly, clutching a small toy. The park was alive with families, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves, and Daniel's gaze softened as he watched Amelia smile at Nathan. Their journey had been marked by loss and betrayal, but in that moment, as they moved together under the open sky, Daniel felt the weight of their trials begin to lift. Their family, forged through forgiveness and choice, had found a new beginning, its strength rooted in the love that had carried them through.